first use case that I mentioned was the idea of pausing some activity. There may be a reason where, if the user were to leave your app to put it in the background but not close it, you want to pause whatever's going on, such as a game or something, and then when they return to the screen, when they return to your activity, resume that. So a really simple example I can do to show what this might look like in code using those lifecycle methods is to have a running timer, something on the screen showing a ticking clock every second, and then I can show you how you can pause and resume that as the user comes in and out of your app. So let's head over to Android Studio and quickly flesh out this example in code. So for this example, as mentioned, we'll have some kind of visible active timer that ticks every second. So we can go ahead and remove the previous text view text there. We'll get rid of the example for welcome to your feed, loading your feed, however many times. So I'm going to remove actually the whole on resume method for now. Delete that, and I'll go ahead and delete the number of loads variable. We're done with that example now. And what I'll do is I'll go to the activity underscore main layout, and we can see where it says this will be the refresh text. I'm now going to change this to say, you have been staring at this screen for, we'll do an example amount of seconds, 25 seconds, exclamation mark. Okay, so this will be the world's most pointless app. It will be a timer telling the user how many seconds they've been looking at the screen for. And this will lead quite nicely into our need to pause the activity when the user is no longer staring at the screen, for example, when it moves to the background. So there we have our new text view, preview text with the tools.text. I'll just go ahead and change the text view ID because it's no longer refresh status, so it can just be text view timer. So that's all we need to do in the layout file. We can go back to main activity now. So the purpose of this is for me to show you the ability to pause some running activity and then resume that when you come back into the app, back into the activity. To actually do a counter, a timer, well, there's actually many different ways you could do this. And the purpose of this tutorial isn't to teach you about timers or running code on background threads, all of the very complicated things that relates to the idea of timers. But what I will do is I'll show you how I would go about finding some code, a quick snippet that I can use, bringing that into my project. So even though I'm not going into detail about using timers, you can see one example right here of how you might have a timer in your app. And you can also see my workflow as a developer when I want to do something and I haven't quite memorized every single possible thing there is to do in code. I might do a search, find an example that I like, bring that in, and then change it to make it work for me. So let's go ahead and do exactly this. I'll go over to a browser, and I'm going to type a search for what I need to do. So I want to have some kind of timer running every second. I'm in Android, I'm in Kotlin. So I'm just going to go ahead and type Android, Kotlin, run code every second. Something like that. This is how I Google to try and find some examples of answers that work for me, because there are many ways to have timers that run code at regular intervals. So I'll search for this. And here we go, Kotlin, call a function every second. That seems ideal for me, so I'll click into this. Stack Overflow, a question and answer forum, which is very heavily used by most developers. And I can see the question. I don't really care about the question. I'm going to skip straight down to some of the answers. They're sorted by highest score. I can change that by newest, but I'll go for highest score. Straight away, this one's got 62 is the accepted answer, but I don't like it. And the reason I don't like it is there's so much code here. I can quickly glance and see this is it's about 2-3 years old, but it's just a bit of a cumbersome, verbose way of doing it. And there are multiple ways to do this. So I'm going to try and find a slightly nice answer. And there we go. Similar time, but this is a much shorter, more succinct solution. I happen to know this is a Kotlin function, fixed rate timer. Okay, so I could actually copy this and paste it straight into Android Studio. Actually, I'm going to take the basic structure of it and do it myself. The key things here are it's fixed rate timer with some arguments, and we'll change those in a second. And there's these curly braces, and in here is where I can run my code. And there's also some stuff to do with this run on the UI thread, which I will show you, but I won't go into great detail about. Threading as a whole minefield. But fixed rate timer, some arguments, which I'll cover, a little block of code where I can then run my code at a regular interval to a regular timer, and then something about the UI thread, which I'll very briefly cover. So let's go back to Android Studio. So just to show this working, in onCreate at the very end, I'm going to type fixed rate timer, and straight away I get the autocomplete. And now I can see the prompt for all the things I could do. I could name this timer, but I can see it's an optional nullable string, so I don't need to give it a name, so that's fine. There's this daemon thing that I don't really worry about, start at, and period. I can see period will be the one that I want. That's the period at which the interval takes place, how many milliseconds between each time the code should run. So I'm going to simply put the word period, okay, and then I can give it a value, and it needs to be a number with an L after it. And I know that this is a value in milliseconds, so 1000 would be every second, L, and then I can simply do the curly braces. This blue period equals thing might seem new to you. There's the idea in Kotlin that if you have lots and lots of arguments, but they're all optional, then you can actually just pick the one you want, in our case period, and then name it, and it will just choose that one argument. Again, these are sort of more advanced concepts that isn't the focus of this tutorial. You know that I don't like to just copy and paste code without explaining it, but I also don't want to muddy the waters of what we're doing, which is to do with pausing and resuming. But that is a named argument, period equals. How do I know that it's in milliseconds? Well, I could command click on this fixed rate timer and see the documentation, and I can see with the interval of period milliseconds between the start of the previous and next task. Okay, so you are free to browse that code and use it in your own projects if you want, but trust me, this is a very basic timer, and I could update my code here. I could do binding.textviewtimer.text equals my updated text. This would crash because whenever you're doing timers and code that runs in the background, it runs on a different thread. And this is a highly complex sounding topic to do with, well, just think of your process on your computer, which might have multiple threads. The idea is that if you have some code running in the background, complex, there's the idea, like I can see it's a very briefly cover. Well, you don't want that code to be blocking your app from being responsive. You don't have that code blocking your app from doing anything else. So Android puts it on a different thread, a different bit of execution in the processor. A very complicated sounding thing that Android takes care of. And you're not actually allowed to update UI from these threads. Okay? Are you still with me? Sounding horribly complex, I would imagine. So all you really need to know with this horrible thread topic that I'm talking about is that we will need to update this text view from a little block of code which is called run on UI thread. It sounds very horrible, all of that threading stuff. This is what you need to do to very simply run a timer and then update some UI, update something on our screen from this timer, which is actually a background thing. It runs in the background on a different thread. So a lot of scary, complex things about threading and background and whatnot, and named arguments. Again, teaching all about timers and background threads is not the focus of this tutorial, but I've hopefully at least covered the concept of these things, so all of this code isn't completely alien to you. You are free to have a play with this in your own time. So a fixed rate timer that will run every 1,000 milliseconds. The code switch is here, and we have this little safe run on UI thread thing to make sure that we come out of the background, come out of that background thread, and are actually allowed to touch things. If I just did this, it would crash saying you can't update visible UI things from a background thread. If you don't believe me, you can try that yourself and see. Okay, so there's our code. We should show that updating by having a variable, so we'll do seconds equals 0. VAR is a variable, and every time this runs, we'll bump the seconds variable up by 1, and we'll just say something like, you have been staring at this screen for $seconds, exclamation mark. Let's go ahead and run this now and see what happens with our timer. Okay, you have been staring at the screen for 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds. We can see that timer is working. Fantastic. So congratulations, you have your first looping timer in your app, which you're free to use for your own projects. But of course, if I were to background this app now, 18 seconds it was just on a moment ago. Well, the sentence says you've been staring at the screen for, and it said 18 seconds. We are now not staring at the screen, but if I go back into it, I can see it's already at 30, 31, 32. Okay, so we need to change our code to pause this running timer whenever we leave the app. So can you think how we might do that in code? Which of our lifecycle methods we might use? Hopefully quite obviously, that would be on pause. So we'll go ahead and override the on pause method. On pause, okay, just scroll down. But now we have a problem. We need to pause this timer, but we declare it an onCreate. We don't make a variable for it, we can't actually access it. So we actually need to turn this fixed rate timer into a variable that we can access in other methods. So we will do exactly this. At the very top of the main activity under our binding variable, we'll make a variable. It can be a value, a VAL, and we'll call it timer. And it'll be of type timer, so a timer. And we can actually make this equal to all of this code. Again, if I was to command click on this, I can see this bit of code. It actually returns a timer, you can see there. So I can copy all of this code, I can cut it out, Command X, Control X, and paste it here, and that will return a timer. I'm getting an error because my seconds variable is declared here. So let's go ahead and move this to the top of the class as well. Okay, so I've moved my seconds variable to the top, and I've made my fixed rate timer into a variable, or a value, called timer. So now I can access this timer from onPause. This will still run even though we're not making it in onCreate. But let's go ahead now and access this from onPause. So we'll do timer dot, and I'm getting a suggestion there. There's a method called cancel. So this is the way we can stop a timer, these fixed rate timers. Okay, so timer.cancel. So when the user backgrounds the app or leaves the app, it will cancel that timer, and this code will stop running. So let's go ahead and run this code now. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's still working, even though we declare it here at the top. This block of code is going to run every second. If I then background the app, I can see it's on 15 seconds, 16. I background the app on 16 seconds, and then give it a few seconds. If I go back into it, I can see it's still at 16. So the onPause functionality is working. It's definitely stopping it, but it's not resuming when we go back into the app. And this is a problem. So what method would we use to resume some activity? Quite obviously, it is the onResume method there. Now you might hope there'd be a method on a timer called timer.start or timer.resume or something like that. Unfortunately, there's not. I just scroll up. This timer class that's available to us from Java, java.util, you can see there. Unfortunately, you can't resume or unpause it. You can only create a timer, which will then start it automatically, and then you can cancel it. So the way that I'm going to get over this little hurdle is I'm going to cut this fixed rate timer block away, and I'm going to make this a later init variable, just like that, and I'm going to actually set this variable, assign it in onResume. So timer equals, I'm going to assign it here and make a new timer. So talking this through, in our main activity, we make a variable of seconds that we can increment, that we can increase by 1, and we declare a variable of type timer. Later init, we'll initialize it later, and then we actually assign it in onResume. In onResume, we make a brand new timer, and when this timer is created, this code will run. It does our wonderful seconds increment in onResume, and we declare a variable of type timer. Later init, we'll initialize it later, and then we actually assign it in onResume. In onResume, we make a brand new timer, and when this timer is created, this code will run. It does our wonderful seconds increasing and our sentence for the user to read, but then in onPause, we cancel that timer. When we then come back into our app, onResume will happen, and it will make a brand new timer. And this is a bit clunky, but perfectly valid, perfectly acceptable way of creating a timer and starting and stopping it. Okay, so let's run this now to prove this works. So 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, 4, our background at 5, stopping it. Okay, so let's run this now to prove this works. So 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, 4, our background at 5 seconds. I'll wait a moment just in case it's still timing, although we know it's not because we cancelled it here. And then when I go back into it, it wasn't 5 seconds, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's now working. 10 seconds, I go to the background and resume it, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so that's a very simple timer that is pausing and resuming as we come in and out of our app. A very simple idea for you, but this is how you might, in code, pause some activity and then resume it when you come back into your app, back into your activity. This can be useful for games. This can be useful for, well, a stopwatch or timer like we're doing. Okay, I've very quickly shown you some code that I've copied and pasted from Google, from Stack Overflow. Something new to do the idea that you can pick just one of our arguments and name it like that, period equals, and then the value. So if you've not seen that before, that's all that is. And then we have a very, very brief talk about the idea of threading, because any long-running code that runs frequently or forever, like this timer, well, it needs to run on a background thread. Otherwise, your phone would be unresponsive. It would be blocking everything else from being able to do anything. So they put on this background thread. So we need to run it from the UI thread if we're going to change the UI, because you're not allowed to update the UI if you're running code from the background. So some scary topics there around the background and threads and whatnot. But you've seen a very simple timer, and we've successfully done a very quick use case for pausing and resuming activity in our app using these lifecycle methods. Fantastic.